And welcome to TIA's 2013 CTO Council Post Show, sponsored by Dell and produced by TIA Now. We're on the heels of another engaging roundtable discussion with members of industry, government, and academia discussing new network technologies and the spectrum that's necessary to keep the network functioning. On our panel is Franklin Flint, right next to me. He's the Global Telecommunications Strategist and Marketing Director at Dell OEM Solutions. Also with us is Jonathan King. He's right next to Franklin. He's the Vice President of Cloud Strategy and Business Development at CenturyLink. And on the end of the panel is James Nolan. He's the Executive Vice President of Innovation Labs at InterDigital. And panelists, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Franklin, I want to get your quick take. Of course, I mentioned at the intro at the top of the show about the CTO Council Roundtable for 2013. What was your quick impression of that?
It was great. We had a large group of people in from different places in the industry. We had people from the government. We had people from various industry leaders. We had from academia come in and discuss the two topics we covered, which were network functions virtualization and shared spectrum. And it was a nice open discussion. We got to hear from people we would not hear from otherwise, who wouldn't get together under normal conditions, because they usually wait for the other company or other group to make a decision, then act on it. They actually got to get together and have a conversation. And I think that's good because it helps everyone plan for what they need to be doing in the future and find out what's going to be interesting for them to be doing to be successful.
Now, the primary topics that were discussed were network function virtualization and those technologies, and also spectrum sharing. Of course, TIA just released their spectrum R&D white paper. That is online at tiaonline.org. I want to start with sort of the 40 to 50,000 foot question about what the advantages are for NFV, and we'll start with that. First of all, let's start with the short-term advantages and goals.
All right, so with NFV, network functions virtualization, companies in the industry are looking to move traditional network functions, things that were built into specialized devices in the past, and turn that into a software solution running on commercial off-the-shelf hardware and running in standard data centers that are managed the way that large cloud data centers are managed today, and take advantage of all the advancements in technology and management and deployment and support and price models and supply chain, everything that goes into those standards-based solutions, but still be able to have the high quality, the reliability, and the performance and the functions that they need that traditionally required very highly engineered systems. You wind up lowering the cost of acquisition, you lower the cost of running the operations, and that's a huge benefit. And that's really what they're focused on today, is moving traditional systems onto these virtualized solutions.
James, one of the discussions had just a few moments ago at the CTO Council Roundtable was one of the goals of NFV is to virtualize over common hardware, but you disagreed with that. You said that it's actually a logical architecture that should be common, but not so much the hardware. Can you elaborate on that?
What I meant by that is it's a common suite of hardware. It's basically just generic servers. I think when people talk about same set of hardware, it doesn't mean we all move to the same. We can have different processor cores just as we do in different PCs and run different software on it. So really the goal here is to make all the functions software based. So as long as we have the instantiate those components, we agree on interfaces, how the memory is allocated, how the processor is allocated. It doesn't really matter what processor or what server it's run on. It should be a generic piece of hardware. And of course, there may be some elements that need hardware acceleration for different functions. That could be custom, but the majority of the hardware should be, as we said, commercial off-the-shelf hardware that's at a lower cost point.
Jonathan, a lot of people want to know what NFV technologies can do for us today that it couldn't do even a few months back. Someone brought up an example again in that CTO roundtable, or council roundtable, about cost per bit. Cost per bit has been going up exponentially over the last number of years, and that NFV technologies can actually facilitate reducing that cost. How so?
So I think if you take a step back, there was a great discussion about today about what is going to be possible in the near term and then what's going to be possible in the longer term. And a lot like server virtualization came on the scene and was right for certain use cases and not right for others out of the gates, I think the same thing is happening with NFV. And in the case of server virtualization, you early on saw test dev workloads in the data center go from being a best practice to really standard practice of being run on virtual infrastructures. And I think a lot of the cost per bit discussion centers around delivering mobile video through cellular, channels and looking at work that Netflix and YouTube and others have done, and seeing how that video delivery and cell networks can start to be delivered through NFV technologies and enhanced through NFV capabilities.
Franklin, your colleague, Mr. Chu over at Dell, talked about network function virtualization, allowing the network to be virtualized. With all the OTT players out there and OTT service providers, like companies like Akamai, providing these services over the last number of years, they're good at it, they're comfortable with it, and the consumer market's using it. How do you expect the telco community to keep pace with that?
That's a really good question. Some of the over-the-top providers may actually get to accelerate their market because of the network function virtualization. I think Akamai might be a good example of that, because what they have learned is how to master the need of that CDN network and how to get things done in a very effective way. By going to an open architecture NFV network, theoretically they could use some of that core network technology to improve their service. But some of the other over-the-top providers, such as Google and Netflix and Amazon and the like, they're offering services pretty much without any cost to them on running the network. So they're able to take advantage of some great capabilities and research and offering things to their customers without having to take into account what it costs to deliver that. But at the same time, they don't have the regulatory requirements and all the privacy control. They do have privacy controls, but not to the extent that the telcos have. So they're able to deliver things quicker and easier without as much risk involved and without as much threat from the government of being getting in trouble, so to speak. Whereas the telcos do have to take that into account. So what they need to do is figure out what they can deliver within that framework that can differentiate them from the traditional over-the-top players and potentially offer a better service. Because right now, a lot of the things that are being provided, like the Amazon Web Services, they're very nice, they're cheap, they tend to get the job done, but they don't offer the kind of guarantees that customers really want to get their hands on. And if you want those kinds of guarantees, someone's going to have to step up and provide that at affordable pricing. And I think the carriers have a lot of opportunity there to master that market, to get to people what they need in an effective way and a cost-effective way with the added features and benefits that the traditional over-the-top guys can't do with their models.
Jonathan, somebody at the CTO Council Roundtable talked about, I guess, ramping up or revising SLAs to meet the new technologies pertaining to or regarding network function virtualization. Have you experienced that?
So I think we're at an interesting time where, as was been discussed earlier, with over-the-top services, you often get what you get. And versus legacy MPLS offerings and other network offerings, you've come to expect a certain kind of service level agreement, service level assurance, and even just through standard dial tone or services where you're accustomed to things like 911 services. There's also these adjacent services that you've come to expect, and that through regulatory regimes and other requirements that are provided. To some extent, NFV and over-the-top era sort of put this in a blender, and people can be in a position where they're accessing services, or their employees or third parties are using services, and it's not always crystal clear where the buck stops and where an SLA covers something and where it doesn't cover something. So I think companies are wrestling with this and looking at how can we pick partners that are going to stand by the SLAs that they give, and even have partners that are going to help us understand the SLAs that we have that don't relate to them, and work on a picture of what their service level agreements are and how they're going to work in this new era of sort of a quilt of SLAs.
Someone again during the discussion a little while back talked about privacy and security kind of pushing into different directions, as far as when you hand over your security to an MSP, you might be handing over your privacy as well. Are there discussions around that you're dealing with right now?
I'm academically dealing with some privacy discussions, so qualifier, I'm not our Chief Privacy Officer, but I was just commenting on what's going on in the industry. In the context of that comment that was made during the roundtable was relating to in the use of encryption, and if NFV could start to anonymize traffic in a way that could enhance individual access and anonymization of traffic. And conceptually, that's an interesting idea to consider. That might be a kind of new era capability of NFV, is that if you software define network functions, and one of those functions is abstracting who is using the network and where they're going, that conceptually is something that's interesting. The comment that was made by the chair is that that's also contrary to basic security tenets, where you're trying to log and track and identify what's happening and when and where on any network. And that as we go into this era of increased attention on privacy, that we start, and new technologies, that you start to think about when are there scenarios where security and privacy can be at odds. They're certainly not always at odds, but sometimes you have a scenario where maybe you need to understand things in a way and just balance that with what's going on. And I think there's a lot more to discuss there.
Now, of course, there were two parts to the roundtable discussion. One was NFV. We've talked about that for a little while. The other one was on spectrum and spectrum sharing. I do have one NFV question left, and I'm going to leave that for the end of the discussion. So I'm going to go right into spectrum sharing. I'll start with Franklin. Franklin, again, a comment was made. I won't say who made the comment, but it was made that whether spectrum sharing is a pipe dream or not. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I think that there needs to be more research on it to see if it can be done. I believe that the conversation that we had downstairs is a good starting point in the TIA and in the industry to keep going forward. They brought up a lot of good questions about whether or not you can do spectrum sharing, whether you let someone who's been least permanently accessed to spectrum ask them to share it with other people, or if you can actually get different kinds of services being provided in the same spectrum. It's all good questions, all good things to talk about, but I think there's more to figure out. I do believe they'll have to figure it out because we're going to run out of spectrum. There's going to be more and more demand from the users to get more access and more bandwidth. And so I believe there will be a drive to try to figure that out.
James, is the government, is the FCC going to allocate licensed spectrum or spectrum to be licensed so they can hold on to it and still not share it? Is that what we think is going to happen?
No, we don't think that. We think that the spectrum will be allocated. There's debate over additional auctions in terms of additional bands, but the way you look at it, and we were talking about this earlier, is how much spectrum is really needed. And even if we withhold some and then bring it in through auction, is that going to be enough longer term? So I would say that there may be some splitting of what type of spectrum is allocated, whether some is licensed or unlicensed, or in what order it's let out to auction. But I don't think that changes the longer term dynamic of the need for the spectrum.
I want to ask you quickly about Tom Wheeler pushing back the impending spectrum auctions to 2015. How does that impact you, and what's your perspective on that?
That's interesting. To push back the auctions for a little bit, really not much. It impacts in terms of the drive towards building systems in terms of the timing. From my company's perspective, and a lot of companies developing systems that take advantage of unlicensed spectrum or shared spectrum, don't think it really has a lot of impact. We see this as a longer term technology play. We see ultimately that shared access and use of licensed and unlicensed spectrum is just part of radio access as it is. So for instance, we think it's just natural longer term, just as we're going to move to small cells where all the signaling happens in that wide area cell. There's no reason why we can't use underlay or smaller cells that are unlicensed spectrum, whether it's a TV white space, 2.3 gigahertz or 3.5 gigahertz. So we think delaying that auction in terms of some of the lower frequency, in terms of deciding what's the best allocation of that, is it better for wide area or is it better for unlicensed? I think that's just a short-term issue. I think longer term you will see a mixed usage, and I do think that you'll see unlicensed access and you'll see shared access methodologies used, even with as a complement to the current technologies.
Franklin, what's the impact on Dell as far as this pushback or the delay on these spectrum auctions?
Well, Dell primarily provides the equipment that builds out networks and things like that. Delaying auctions doesn't directly impact us, but since we do offer products that have radios in them, being able to design and deliver products that can connect to whatever is available is important to us.
Mr. Luker from NITRD, or NITRD, it's pronounced the NITRD, said technology for spectrum has come a long way, but now it's a more a discussion about politics and economics. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so definitely agree with that. Technology has come a tremendous leaps in the last number of years. Into digital, we've built platforms, prototype testbed platforms, where we've built shared access systems on top of existing systems, on top of Wi-Fi and on top of LTE. So we've recently built systems that adapt Wi-Fi to the TV whitespace frequencies. And recently at a trade show event, we demonstrated a 40 megabit link for backhaul using that TV whitespace system. So I think if people would have said 12, 18 months ago that wouldn't work with sensing, and that system was built with both sensing, a database, an enhanced MAC. So a lot of those features and pieces of technology are being developed. The other part of that, in terms of where do we go from regulation and requirements and standards, that's really the more difficult piece in terms of getting the rules of the road correctly, because we really don't want to be in a position where downstream we don't have the requirements fully nailed down, and we go into positions like we had recently with satellite interference with GPS. And I think it's really a question of the technologies are evolving. It's really going to be a case of when can the technologies be low cost to be proliferated at a consumer level. And the gating item there is probably broadband radios that would be used for these devices that can give you really a broadband experience in licensed and unlicensed at the same time.
Jonathan, as a kind of a wrap to the roundtable discussion, there was a couple mentions about unregulated and non-standardized NFV technologies proliferating in the industry, in the service market, the consumer market over the next 2-3 years, and that we'll probably get it right as far as regulating those services, but not until the next 8 or 10 years. How does that affect you?
It's just such a dynamic and fast-moving market. I think part of it is just trying to track and make sense of where and when it's going to go. We compete with and deliver. We compete with many different kinds of players in our markets, and we work with many different technologies and are always watching what's coming over the horizon. And I think you have just such an interesting time where, just to circle back briefly, where you have Wi-Fi pervasive now. I can remember where I would travel and you'd be thrilled to get a 14K connection over a and hear the handoff, right? And you think you're going to be able to send a lot of emails. And now you're at a point where you're connected all the time, and we are working on new initiatives where we're delivering fiber to pervasively through markets in Omaha and Las Vegas, and all the way to cloud businesses and expanding in that arena. So it's not only that the space in the network arena and NFV itself is changing. At the last TIA, we talked about software-defined networking and cybersecurity. We discussed today talking about privacy and cloud networking. And it's not just what's going to happen in network and NFV and what's going to happen with regulation in that space. It's what's going to happen in like 3 dimensions, really around everything. And I think we're just watching it very closely. We're very excited about where we're positioned in the market with the asset base that we have. And frankly, just as a computer geek, I'm excited because a lot of the stuff that you used to see on TV and with science fiction is now like in our hands and even exceeding our expectations.
We're talking about NFV technologies and services over the next couple of years and the rollout of those services. If those services are unregulated and non-standardized, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing for bringing technology to market. A company that is not encumbered with trying to get along with everybody else can focus their resources in delivering something on their own, quickly, effectively, and sometimes being first to market with that is very helpful because it drives things forward. But the nice thing about having everyone working together and having open standards and somewhat regulated type solutions out there is it drives more competition. It also drives heavy innovation in a competitive environment because people are always trying to outclass each other within those confines, which can lead to some great advancements. So in the short term, it's probably good to have an unregulated type of solution going out there, but in the long term, open standards and working together is going to be a much better approach.
Gentlemen, it's great to have all 3 of you here again at our CTO Council Roundtable post-show in 2013 Of course, we talked about a number of topics, NFV, spectrum sharing. We also touched on standards just a bit, so that was good. I noticed it came in towards the tail end of the roundtable discussion just a little bit earlier, but I think it's definitely part of the conversation. So thanks for joining us.